The U.S. is lifting sanctions on the $17 billion Chinese smartphone maker ZTE. Last year, the Trump administration banned the company from buying U.S. components, causing it to cease major operations. In an interview this morning with CNBC, the U.S. Commerce Secretary said a deal has been struck. Let's take a listen.
It imposes the most strict compliance that we've ever had on any company, American or foreign. We are literally embedding a compliance department of our choosing into the company to monitor it going forward.
Under the new deal, ZTE will pay $1 billion fine for violating international trade sanctions against Iran and North Korea. It will also have to replace its entire board and management within 30 days. And on top of paying for a U.S.-selected compliance team, the company will deposit $400 million into an escrow account in case of any future violations. Joining us now to round up this and some of the other big business stories of the day is Walid Hijazi. He's an associate professor at the University of Toronto's Robin School of Management. Nice to see you, sir. $1 billion fine, a $400 million deposited into an escrow account in case you misbehave going forward, and an embedded compliance team. I mean, I've never heard anything like this.
No, it must be humiliating for the Chinese to accept these terms, especially with the belligerent U.S. president. Right. It just shows you how China is still so dependent on the U.S. for advanced technology.
Right.
What's most remarkable about this is the fact that, the prior was that Trump would go easy on China because he needs help on the North Korean file. But the fact that the Chinese accepted this just shows you how vulnerable they are to U.S. sanctions.
And in that, it's basically that they can't make a phone, and ZTE is one of the companies that's going to be in a big push for 5G, but that they can't really make the phone that they want to make that's capable of doing that without buying U.S. parts, right?
Yeah, that's
like
exactly.
They just can't make them at home. Right?
Yeah, so, one thing I ask my students all the time, where is their iPhone made? And they all say China, but of course, you look at $1,000 of value, about $100 or less is done in China. It's all the assembly.
Right.
All the advanced parts are still done in the U.S. and California or in other advanced countries. China still has a long way to go. But what's also remarkable about this, we're talking about, the tariffs on Canadian aluminum and steel, and that we're a security threat. All of the Republicans are furious at Trump because ZTE is a much larger security threat to the U.S.
Sure.
than Canadians are.
Right.
So it's pretty remarkable.
Well, and when you think about it, a cell phone company that's going to have access to all the spectrum, in the hands of millions of people around America, that's essentially a state-owned enterprise. It's a very different look at a very different part of this. But you talked about the how this fits into the bigger picture with the dispute with China. This must have been worked out beforehand, right? Like, was this part of making that June 12th summit actually happen? They must have dealt with this on the side of it.
Yeah, there's no question. This is very complicated. This is not something the Chinese were surprised about during the summit. They decided this in advance. But I think the big prize for the Americans is also Huawei, because ZTE is the second largest. The biggest is Huawei, which has a huge presence in Canada, building out our telecommunications network, but has been not allowed to build out U.S. government networks. So there's a lot of concern there about the theft of intellectual property, and this may be one step in a series of steps the Americans deploy to mitigate the likelihood of the Chinese accessing U.S. IP.
Major blow to the securities regulator in Quebec, the AMF, the Autorité des marchés financiers. In this case that they were running of insider trading against Amaya, the case was thrown out. What happened here?
Yeah, so it's one of the largest insider trading cases in Canadian history. One of the big lessons we learned from the research is that we need to have the public to have complete confidence in financial markets. This completely undermines that, without saying whether there's guilt or not, but this just speaks to the need for a national regulator so that they can move much more quickly, they're better funded, and they wouldn't make the kinds of mistakes that they've made in terms of turning over documents for the defense side that they weren't supposed to.
It's a remarkable thing. So you have this company that's accused of insider trading. Basically, they're trying to pump up the stock before a deal was made. And then 3 times over the course of this trial, the company Maya went to the regulator and said, to the judge and said, we should get this thrown out because problems with disclosure from the AMF, we're not getting the right amounts of information. Twice the judge said no. And on the third time it was because they sent inadvertently, what was it, 300,000 documents to them that they shouldn't have been able to see.
Yeah, which just shows that they're completely not well funded. They're not prepared to deal with a case of this complexity.
Right.
We need a national regulator, Peter.
Well, do we need a national regulator? Do we need something like the AMF to get its act together and show that it can actually litigate a case like this?
Yeah, well, I just wonder how many other cases don't get litigated because of a lack of ability to identify these underlying, because, many of these activities go undetected.
Right.
So we need to have confidence in financial markets so that the average investor, when he or she puts her money in the market,
You believe that you have trust in
that
the
you
system.
believe it. And then, so when you have something like this and they're not prosecuted, it's a real problem.
We've done stories on this show before about, because hydro is so cheap in Quebec, because so much of it comes from hydroelectric dams, that the cryptocurrency mining industry had been flooding into Quebec to try to, because they can get access to cheap energy, that's what it takes to build up to mine these cryptocurrencies. Finally, the Quebec government and the Quebec energy minister are like, okay, hold on, we're going to put a stop to this. Is it too late, or is this just enough at just the right time?
It might be too late because, the Quebec government has very cheap electricity, and the most important input in mining cryptocurrencies is electricity.
Right.
Peter, there's demand for 25% of Quebec's capacity just for
this.
Just for this. So this is enormous. But, the government of Quebec they actually had a call for crypto companies to come to Quebec to take advantage of their excess capacity in electricity. They just didn't anticipate this much demand.
Right. And I mean, it's crazy. They're putting a limit in. It would be 500 megawatts on all cryptocurrency. That would be enough energy to run a single aluminum smelting plant. But the crypto miners have asked for 17,000 megabytes in capacity for their operations.
Yeah, so that there has to be some kind of balance. But one thing about the Quebec government is they said when they called for these kinds of companies, they wanted Google and Microsoft and Apple. They didn't expect this much in terms of cryptocurrency. Sure. I don't think they see it as a real industry because they don't see as many jobs being created. So when the Quebec government really called for this industry, what they really wanted was these companies to come in,
the big guys,
and
hire all kinds of people, and
these companies will create jobs, will generate tax revenue, but they're not going to create the kinds of jobs they anticipated. Again, it shows another Quebec story, but it shows not really understanding what the impact would be of the call they had.
It's an interesting point. Well, great to see you. Thanks for doing this. Waleed Hijazi, Associate Professor at the University of Toronto's Rockman School of Management.